You're scrolling through your phone when breaking news alerts start flooding in about the first concrete evidence of D4vd's location in over 6 weeks of intensive searching. The discovery came at dawn, when park rangers conducting routine patrols in the remote wilderness of Glacier National Park stumbled upon an abandoned campsite that appeared to have been hastily evacuated. What they found would reignite the massive manhunt and provide investigators with their most promising lead since David Chen first disappeared after the discovery of his third victim. FBI forensic teams, flown in by helicopter within hours of the discovery, confirmed that DNA evidence recovered from the campsite matched samples from David's apartment. The genetic material was found on discarded clothing, food containers, and makeshift shelter materials that suggested someone had been living at the remote location for an extended period. Laboratory analysis indicated the evidence was no more than 72 hours old when discovered. Special Agent Lisa Chen, who had been coordinating the nationwide manhunt, held an emergency press conference at the park's headquarters. This is the most significant development in our investigation since Mr. Chen's disappearance. She announced to a crowd of reporters who had rushed to the remote Montana location. We now have confirmation that he was alive and in this area as recently as 3 days ago. The campsite revealed sophisticated survival techniques that explained how David had managed to evade capture for so long. He had constructed a shelter using natural materials that would be nearly invisible from aerial surveillance, positioned in a location with multiple escape routes and clear sight lines to detect approaching searchers. Park officials noted that the site required advanced wilderness knowledge to locate and utilize effectively. Evidence suggested David had been monitoring law enforcement communications from his remote hideout. A makeshift antenna system was found near the campsite, along with components from what appeared to be a modified radio scanner. This explained how he had managed to stay ahead of search teams and avoid detection despite multiple intensive sweeps of the area. Most concerning was evidence that David might not have been alone. Footprint analysis revealed at least 2 different sets of tracks around the campsite, suggesting he may have been meeting with someone who was providing supplies or assistance. The second set of prints appeared to belong to someone with a smaller shoe size, possibly indicating a female accomplice who hadn't been identified in the investigation. Search teams immediately flooded the area, establishing a perimeter around the campsite and beginning systematic sweeps of the surrounding wilderness. Tracking dogs picked up David's scent leading away from the site, heading deeper into the mountainous terrain where helicopter access was limited and ground searches would be extremely difficult. Now people are wondering, when someone has been successfully hiding for weeks, how close can investigators get before they disappear again? The fresh search launched immediately after the DNA discovery represented the largest deployment of resources since the manhunt began, with over 300 law enforcement officers from multiple agencies converging on the remote Montana wilderness. The operation faced unique challenges due to the rugged terrain and David's apparent familiarity with advanced evasion techniques. Helicopter crews equipped with thermal imaging technology began systematic grid searches of the mountainous region surrounding the campsite. The aircraft faced significant challenges due to the altitude, weather conditions, and dense forest canopy that could easily conceal someone with wilderness survival training. Search patterns were carefully coordinated to prevent David from slipping between coverage areas. But the vast territory made complete surveillance impossible. Ground teams with tracking dogs followed scent trails leading away from the abandoned campsite, but the tracks disappeared at a rocky creek bed approximately 2 miles from the original site. Investigators theorized that David had used the water to mask his scent and confuse tracking efforts, a technique that suggested either extensive preparation or guidance from someone with specialized knowledge. The discovery of the second set of footprints prompted a complete review of David's known associates and communications. FBI agents began re-interviewing family members, former co-workers, and acquaintances to identify anyone who might possess the wilderness skills needed to assist his survival, or who had expressed sympathy for his situation. Phone records from the months before his disappearance were analyzed again with this new information in mind. Dr. Sarah Kim, the criminal psychologist consulting on the case, provided insight into David's psychological state after weeks of isolation in the wilderness. Extended periods of hiding in remote areas typically cause significant mental deterioration, she explained during a briefing with search coordinators. However, if he's receiving assistance from someone, that changes the dynamic significantly. Social contact could help maintain his psychological stability and extend his ability to evade capture. Weather conditions added urgency to the search operation. Forecasters predicted a severe storm system moving into the area within 48 hours, bringing heavy snow and temperatures that could drop below zero. If David was still in the region, the weather could either force him to seek shelter in detectable locations or create conditions where survival became impossible without proper equipment. The campsite analysis revealed that David had been living more comfortably than investigators had expected. He had access to camping equipment, preserved food, and even reading materials that suggested someone was resupplying him regularly. Financial investigators began examining credit card and purchase records for outdoor equipment bought in the region over the past month. looking for patterns that might identify his support network. Local communities were placed on high alert as the search intensified. Residents reported increased security measures and altered routines as law enforcement warned that David might attempt to seek shelter or supplies from civilian sources if weather conditions forced him out of the wilderness. How do you track someone through mountainous wilderness when they've had weeks to prepare hiding places and escape routes? The DNA breakthrough triggered a comprehensive reevaluation of the entire investigation, forcing investigators to reconsider assumptions about David's capabilities, resources, and potential support network. What had initially appeared to be a desperate flight from justice was now revealed as a carefully planned and potentially assisted wilderness survival operation. Forensic analysis of materials found at the campsite provided disturbing insights into David's mental state and future intentions. Personal items recovered included a notebook containing detailed observations about search helicopter patterns, law enforcement response times, and what appeared to be psychological profiles of investigating officers. The writing suggested someone who was not just hiding, but actively studying and planning countermeasures against the manhunt. Most concerning were references in the notebook to unfinished business and detailed sketches that appeared to show locations around his hometown. Investigators interpreted these as potential indicators that David might be planning to return to complete additional attacks rather than simply trying to escape permanently. The possibility that he viewed his wilderness retreat as temporary preparation rather than permanent hiding changed the entire threat assessment. Technical analysis of the radio equipment found near the campsite revealed sophisticated modifications that allowed David to monitor not just police communications, but also cell phone traffic in the surrounding area. FBI communications security experts warned that he might have been intercepting conversations between investigators, family members of victims, and potentially even confidential discussions about search strategies. The evidence of a second person at the campsite prompted a massive review of surveillance footage from outdoor supply stores, gas stations, and other businesses in a 200-mile radius of the discovery location. Investigators were looking for anyone who might have been purchasing supplies that could support two people in wilderness conditions. The search revealed several suspicious purchases, but identifying the buyers proved challenging due to cash transactions and limited security coverage in rural areas. Interviews with local residents revealed that several people had reported unusual activity in the remote area over the past month. A rancher mentioned seeing lights in the wilderness late at night, while hikers reported finding evidence of human presence in areas that were supposedly uninhabited. These reports had been filed with park officials but hadn't been connected to the manhunt until the campsite discovery. The investigation expanded to include experts in wilderness survival and military evasion techniques. Consultants who had trained Special Forces personnel provided insights into David's likely strategies and capabilities. Their assessment was sobering. Someone with proper training and adequate supplies could potentially remain hidden in the wilderness indefinitely, especially with assistance from accomplices who could provide resupply and intelligence. Victim families reacted to the breakthrough with mixed emotions. While the concrete evidence of David's recent presence renewed hope for his eventual capture, the revelation that he had been living comfortably while their loved ones remained unavenged created additional anger and frustration. Patricia Thompson, Jessica's mother, expressed the complexity of emotions many families felt. It's good to know he's still out there to be caught, but knowing he's been camping while we've been grieving just makes it worse. When someone turns wilderness survival into a strategic advantage against law enforcement, how do you adapt traditional search methods to counter military-level evasion techniques? As search teams combed through the rugged Montana wilderness, the investigation revealed David's survival operation was far more sophisticated than anyone had imagined. The campsite was just one of at least 3 locations he had been using in a rotation designed to avoid detection while maintaining access to resources and communication capabilities. Park rangers, working with FBI tracking experts, discovered evidence of a systematic approach to wilderness concealment that suggested extensive planning or professional guidance. David had established multiple supply caches hidden throughout the region, each containing enough provisions to support him for several weeks. The caches were located in natural caves, hollow trees, and under rock formations that would be nearly impossible to detect without specific knowledge of their locations. Jeep's analysis of the cache locations revealed a sophisticated understanding of the area's geography and search patterns. Each hiding spot was positioned to provide multiple escape routes while remaining invisible from aerial surveillance. The spacing between locations suggested David could move between them without crossing areas where search teams were likely to establish observation points or roadblocks. Communications equipment found at secondary sites indicated David had been maintaining contact with outside parties throughout his time in the wilderness. Digital forensics experts recovered fragments of encrypted messages from damaged devices, though decryption efforts were still ongoing. The messages appeared to contain coded references to supply needs, weather conditions, and search team movements. The sophistication of the operation prompted FBI analysts to consider whether David might have received training from military or intelligence sources. His ability to establish and maintain multiple wilderness bases while evading one of the largest manhunts in recent history exceeded what most criminals could accomplish without specialized knowledge. Background investigations expanded to include any possible connections to survival training programs, military contractors, or individuals with special operations experience. Local law enforcement agencies reported a surge in suspicious activity as the search intensified. Several residents called to report strangers asking detailed questions about local terrain, road conditions, and law enforcement presence in the area. These individuals appeared to be conducting reconnaissance that might be related to David's support network, though none had been apprehended for questioning. The weather system moving into the area created additional urgency for the search operation. Meteorologists warned that the approaching storm could dump up to 3 feet of snow in the higher elevations where David was believed to be hiding. Such conditions would make ground searches nearly impossible, while potentially forcing him to seek lower elevation shelter where detection might be more likely. Search coordinators faced difficult decisions about resource allocation as the window for effective operations narrowed. The vast wilderness area made it impossible to maintain surveillance on all potential hiding spots simultaneously, requiring strategic decisions about which locations to prioritize. Each choice carried the risk of allowing David to escape to areas that weren't being monitored. The psychological pressure on search teams intensified as they operated in increasingly difficult conditions while knowing they were pursuing someone who had demonstrated exceptional evasion skills. Team leaders reported concerns about maintaining morale and focus as the operation stretched into its second week without achieving capture despite the promising DNA evidence. When someone has prepared multiple wilderness hideouts and maintains outside communication, how do you prevent them from simply moving to the next prepared location each time searchers get close? The expanding search operation began revealing connections that suggested David's wilderness survival was part of a larger network of individuals with concerning backgrounds and capabilities. As investigators traced the supply chains and communication systems supporting his evasion, they uncovered what appeared to be an organized effort to keep him hidden from law enforcement. Financial investigations revealed a pattern of cash transactions at outdoor supply stores across 3 states that appeared to be coordinated to avoid detection while providing David with necessary resources. The purchases included specialized wilderness survival equipment, long-term food storage, and communication devices that would allow extended off-grid operations. Payment patterns suggested multiple individuals were involved in the procurement and delivery of supplies. Background checks on individuals identified through these financial transactions revealed disturbing connections. Several were military veterans with specialized training in survival and evasion techniques. Others had previous arrests for various offenses, including domestic violence, stalking, and weapons violations. The common thread appeared to be a shared anti-government sentiment and distrust of law enforcement that made them willing to assist someone evading capture. FBI domestic terrorism experts began investigating whether David's support network represented a broader threat to public safety. Communications intercepts revealed discussions about resistance operations and protecting patriots from government persecution. While the language was often vague, the tone suggested an organized group with ideological motivations for helping fugitives evade law enforcement. The investigation expanded to include surveillance of known associates of the individuals providing support to David. This revealed a network of communication that extended across multiple states and included individuals who hadn't been previously connected to the case. Some appeared to be providing logistical support, while others were sharing intelligence about law enforcement activities and search patterns. Social media analysis revealed online communities where members discussed techniques for evading law enforcement and supporting political prisoners, a term some users applied to David despite his violent crimes. These platforms served as recruitment tools and coordination centers for individuals willing to assist in various anti-government activities, including harboring fugitives. Local communities where network members were identified reported increased tensions as law enforcement attention focused on residents who hadn't previously been under investigation. Some individuals were questioned about their activities and association, leading to complaints about harassment and violations of civil liberties. The balance between public safety and individual rights became a contentious issue in affected areas. The revelation of an organized support network fundamentally changed how investigators approached the manhunt. Rather than pursuing a single fugitive, they were now tracking a coordinated group with resources and capabilities that could potentially support David indefinitely. The implications for other criminal investigations were concerning, as it suggested similar networks might exist to support other fugitives. Victim advocacy groups expressed frustration that David was receiving organized assistance while their families continued to wait for justice. The knowledge that multiple individuals were actively working to keep him free added another layer of pain to families already struggling with the extended investigation. Some began organizing their own advocacy efforts to counter what they saw as a network of criminal sympathizers. When a fugitive has access to an organized support network with military training and anti-government motivations, how does law enforcement adapt their strategies to counter a coordinated resistance effort? The discovery of David's extensive support network prompted federal authorities to launch parallel investigations into what appeared to be a domestic terrorism cell operating under the guise of fugitive assistance. The scope of the organization exceeded anything investigators had encountered in similar cases, revealing a structured group with specific roles, communication protocols, and operational security measures. Surveillance operations revealed that network members were using sophisticated counterintelligence techniques to avoid detection while coordinating support for David. Communications were conducted through encrypted channels. Meetings were held in remote locations with security precautions, and members used code names and operational security procedures similar to those employed by intelligence agencies. The network structure included individuals responsible for logistics, intelligence gathering, communications, and operational security. Some members had never met David personally, but were motivated by ideological beliefs about government overreach and the right to resist law enforcement. This philosophical foundation made the network more resilient than typical criminal organizations, as members were driven by principles rather than just personal loyalty. Intelligence analysis revealed that the network had been planning for this scenario long before David committed his crimes. They had identified potential fugitives within their community and developed protocols for providing assistance if those individuals needed to evade law enforcement. David appeared to have been selected as someone worthy of support based on his perceived status as a victim of government persecution. The sophistication of the operation included contingency plans for various scenarios, including law enforcement infiltration attempts, network member arrests, and resource disruption efforts. Documents recovered during search warrants revealed detailed protocols for relocating fugitives, establishing new communication channels, and maintaining operational security under pressure from law enforcement investigation. Federal prosecutors began preparing cases against network members under domestic terrorism statutes, marking one of the first times such charges had been applied to fugitive assistance operations. The legal precedent could have significant implications for how similar cases were prosecuted in the future, though civil liberties advocates raised concerns about criminalizing ideological beliefs and association. The investigation revealed connections to other unsolved cases where fugitives had managed to evade capture for extended periods. Investigators began reviewing these cases to determine whether similar support networks might have been involved in other successful evasions. The possibility that organized fugitive assistance was more widespread than previously understood had implications for law enforcement strategies nationwide. Community reaction to the network's exposure was mixed, with some residents expressing shock that such an organization existed in their area while others defended the right of individuals to resist what they viewed as government overreach. The ideological divisions reflected broader societal tensions about the role of government and individual rights, making the case about more than just criminal justice. Local law enforcement agencies found themselves dealing with increased tensions as the investigation expanded to include individuals who hadn't been previously suspected of criminal activity. Some community members complained about surveillance and questioning techniques, while others demanded more aggressive action against anyone providing assistance to David. The psychological impact on investigators was significant, as they realized they weren't just hunting one fugitive, but dismantling an entire organization designed to thwart law enforcement efforts. The complexity of the case required resources and expertise that stretched the capabilities of traditional criminal investigation units. When fugitive assistance becomes an organized ideological movement with sophisticated operational capabilities, how do you balance effective law enforcement with constitutional protections for association and belief? 2 months after David's initial escape, and 6 weeks after the DNA breakthrough at the Montana campsite, the investigation had evolved into one of the most complex domestic terrorism cases in recent FBI history. What began as a manhunt for a single fugitive had exposed a nationwide network of individuals committed to resisting law enforcement through coordinated fugitive assistance operations. The scope of arrests resulting from the network investigation was unprecedented. Federal agents had taken into custody over 30 individuals across 12 states on charges ranging from harboring a fugitive to domestic terrorism conspiracy. The arrests revealed the true extent of the organization and demonstrated that David's case was just one example of their activities rather than an isolated incident. Despite the network disruption, David remained at large. Though investigators believed his support system had been significantly compromised, communication intercepts suggested he was now operating with limited resources and assistance, potentially making him more vulnerable to capture, but also more desperate and dangerous. The psychological pressure of isolation combined with knowledge that his support network was being dismantled created an unpredictable threat assessment. Legal proceedings against network members promised to be complex and lengthy, with defense attorneys challenging the application of domestic terrorism statutes to fugitive assistance activities. The cases would establish important legal precedents about the boundaries between ideological belief and criminal conspiracy, with implications for similar investigations in the future. The investigation's impact extended beyond law enforcement into broader discussions about domestic terrorism, ideological extremism, and the effectiveness of traditional criminal justice approaches to politically motivated crimes. Academic experts, policy analysts, and civil liberties advocates debated whether the network represented a new form of domestic threat that required different legal and investigative frameworks. Victim families found themselves caught between satisfaction that the network was being dismantled and frustration that David remained free despite the massive investigation. Some families expressed concern that the focus on network members might be diverting resources from the primary goal of capturing their loved one's killer. Others appreciated that the broader investigation was revealing systemic issues that could prevent similar cases in the future. The financial cost of the extended investigation had reached an estimated $25 million, kidnapping, making it one of the most expensive domestic terrorism investigations in FBI history. Congressional oversight committees began questioning the resource allocation and effectiveness of the approach, while law enforcement officials defended the necessity of dismantling the entire network rather than focusing solely on capturing David. Communities where network members had been arrested struggled with the revelation that organized criminal activity had been occurring in their midst. Some residents reported feeling betrayed by neighbors they had trusted, while others questioned whether the investigation represented government overreach against individuals exercising their constitutional rights to association and belief. The case had fundamentally changed how law enforcement agencies approached fugitive investigations, with new protocols developed for identifying and disrupting support networks. Training programs were implemented to help investigators recognize signs of organized assistance and coordinate multi-jurisdictional responses to complex evasion operations. As the investigation continued, with David still at large, but his support network largely dismantled, law enforcement officials acknowledged that the case had revealed vulnerabilities in traditional manhunt approaches. The sophistication of modern fugitive assistance networks required new strategies, technologies, and legal frameworks that were still being developed and refined. The ultimate resolution of David's case remained uncertain, but the investigation had already achieved significant success in exposing and disrupting a domestic terrorism network that posed broader threats to public safety and law enforcement effectiveness. When capturing one fugitive leads to uncovering an entire anti-government organization, what does that reveal about hidden threats operating within our communities? Not just the loss of her daughter, but the additional pain caused by David's refusal to explain his actions or show any remorse. The prosecution argued forcefully for the death penalty, citing the premeditated nature of the crimes, the suffering inflicted on victims, and the complete lack of remorse demonstrated by David's continued silence. They presented evidence of the psychological torture victims endured before their deaths, and argued that the severity of the crimes warranted the ultimate punishment available under law. Defense attorneys argued against the death penalty, emphasizing David's lack of prior criminal history and raising questions about his mental state that his silence had prevented from being fully explored. They argued that life imprisonment without possibility of parole would ensure public safety, while avoiding the ethical and legal complexities of capital punishment. Their arguments faced an uphill battle given the horrific nature of the crimes and David's complete lack of cooperation or remorse. The judge's sentencing decision, delivered after careful consideration of all factors, sentenced David to life imprisonment without possibility of parole on each murder count, to be served consecutively. While the judge acknowledged the prosecution's arguments for the death penalty had merit, concerns about ensuring the sentence would withstand appeals and the defendant's unusual refusal to participate in his defense influenced the decision toward life imprisonment. David maintained his silence even as the sentence was pronounced, showing no visible reaction to learning he would spend the remainder of his life in prison. His continued refusal to speak, even in this final moment, denied victim families the acknowledgement or remorse they desperately sought. The silence that had characterized his defense continued through sentencing, leaving everyone involved frustrated by the lack of closure his words might have provided. The case's conclusion prompted broader discussions about criminal justice system responses to defendants who refused to participate in proceedings. Legal scholars debated whether additional mechanisms were needed to address such situations while protecting constitutional rights. The precedent set by David's case would likely influence how future cases involving non-cooperative defendants were handled. Victim advocacy groups used the case to highlight the need for better support systems for families navigating the criminal justice process. The extended timeline from crimes to conviction, complicated by David's flight and subsequent silence, had created years of trauma and uncertainty for families who deserved more efficient paths to justice and healing. The support network that had assisted David's flight faced their own legal consequences, with several members receiving significant prison sentences for domestic terrorism and fugitive assistance charges. These convictions sent a message about the serious consequences of helping dangerous criminals evade justice, though concerns remained about whether such prosecutions might deter legitimate criticism of government overreach. Media analysis of the case focused on lessons learned about manhunt procedures, fugitive networks, and the challenges of prosecuting defendants who refuse to cooperate with legal proceedings. True crime documentaries and analysis programs examined every aspect of the investigation, trial, and outcome, ensuring the case would remain in public consciousness as an example of both successful investigation and the limitations of the justice system. As David was transferred to a maximum security federal prison to begin serving his life sentences, investigators continued working to understand the full scope of his crimes and potential additional victims. His silence meant that questions might remain unanswered indefinitely, leaving families and law enforcement to wonder whether other crimes might have been committed that would never be solved. The case concluded with justice served in the form of conviction and life imprisonment, but without the complete understanding and closure that comes from a defendant who acknowledges their crimes and explains their actions. When someone commits horrific acts and then refuses to ever speak about them, are we left with justice without truth? And can that ever be truly satisfying for those seeking answers about why their loved ones were taken?